Suzannah, I love your energy. Have you gotten that through your entire life that you've good energy? Have you heard that growing up?
Actually, it's a strange thing, and I don't know. I think it's I think you pick up and you feed off of other people's energy, and I
Mm,
think it's just amazing what we find when we do that.
mm.
Thank you so much. I love that. It's one of the best compliments I could ever receive.
When I was growing up, I was just telling a girlfriend this morning. When I was growing up, everyone would tell me you've great energy, but I almost took it as a detriment that I was too much. So I tried to hide it back, dim my light. Did you ever do that through your journey growing back, trying to hold back your energy?
Oh
And if
yes.
so, when do you think you sort of wrote yourself a permission slip to lean into it?
Yeah, you know what? It's so strange because I was actually really shy when I was little, which people think is a lie, but it's true. And I think as I was so like I didn't feel like I was the same, and so I
Mm,
tried to be the same, just like we all do at some point in our life. And yeah, where I think I really came to it, especially the energy of certain groups of people, and these groups of people are groups that I've spent a lot of time with, like med school, right? Where I always felt like people were like, "How did you get here?"
who are you?
Who are you and why are you here? And then, but also, yoga has been one of my just saviors, and it's really
Mm,
saved me. But my energy as a yoga teacher is very different. And so, and I heard that as I was working with yoga teacher training, and I have taught yoga anatomy for injury prevention with some teacher trainers, and lifestyle medicine for yogis who are becoming teachers, because I think that group of people just is that's where people go for true advice on health, right? So I think that they need to be equipped with what the evidence says, and I love working with that group. But I remember one of the feedback that I got from one of the students was that she was like, I just found it so powerful because everyone else is so calm and I'm not calm. And I always thought, how could I be a yoga teacher if I'm not this like Zen state all the time? And then you came on. And she said it, and I found power in that, and that you don't have to be the same, and that if
mm,
you're trying to adapt, then we're not being our authentic selves, and what we have to offer is so valuable. And if life would be so dull if we were the same. And then
mm.
granted, I have all these wonderful yogi friends that do ground me, and that balance is wonderful. But I feel like, in a sense, we highly energetic people can also kind of lift up some of that grounding, and then it creates this wonderful balance. And so yeah, I think your question was, when did you feel free to be that? And I
Yeah.
think I'd love to know your story, but it's kind of a progression. And I think once you kind of stop caring so much about what other people think,
Mm.
and you just find, you know, is this helping me be my finest self? Then I will continue doing this. And then you begin to recognize what is true to you, and
Yeah.
you following that. And it's a constant journey, right? Would you say the same?
Oh God, girl. Yes, it's a constant journey. I love to say that I think our digital world, man, where everyone posts their accolades and their successes, and it's where that you see the muck and the myrrh, you have tendency to feel that you're behind.
Yeah.
And right. And which is why I so love you spreading your movement, being it here and putting down the mask and being vulnerable and real. And to answer your question, it's funny. I just heard Julia Louise Dreyfus has a new podcast out.
I love her.
Oh, I love her too. It's called Wiser Than Me. And it's all about interviewing women that have been through this journey much longer. And she says, in our culture, we discredit you as you get older
Yeah.
and you lose your airtime, especially women. So she had Jane Fonda on. And oh, it's such a good episode. I highly recommend it. And Jane Fonda, I thought this was such a gift. She was talking about her life. And she said, I looked at it as quarters. So every 30 years, I'm in my my first quarter, my second quarter, my third quarter, my fourth quarter. And she said, I realized that those first 2 quarters until I was 60 was giving me all these lessons to write the permission slip to be who I needed to be, but I didn't know how.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, my journey, I'm curious with the same. It comes with, I really feel it comes with age and the lessons learned.
Yeah. Yeah, right on. I mean, and also with a lot of humility and like awareness that God, the more you know, the less the more there is to know. It's just really pointing that out. And and I think that we also have to get past some of the guilt that goes on with not being the same as everyone else that is on your journey, like as a physician and what I do now versus what I was trained to do. I had to really be okay with the fact that I felt this need to say, okay, well, I've done ICU, I should be taking care of really sick patients, and I should be doing things like managing vents and all this like really like high tech medicine. And I thought, but that's not why I'm here. The
Mm,
reason I'm here is not to be those super brainy people that are doing all the scientific research and really maximizing the calculations and all those patients on the brink. I'm here to relate to people. That's why I went into this, because I had an experience where the doctor had no relationship to me, didn't ask me or understand why I thought that my issue, in this case, I had a head injury and I'm deaf in one ear as a result of it. And I was a singer. And so to me, that was really important, because I thought,
mhm,
music is really part of me and it's part of something that I value. And I thought, how's this going to affect my ability to perform and to play and to sing and all what he did was minimize me and say, it doesn't
mm,
matter if you have the other ear, it's not a big deal, because he sees so much bigger and better things. And then as a result, I felt like small and stupid
mhm,
for being at all concerned about what my issue was. And that's why I was like, people that cannot come to a relationship with you should not be in a role of quote healing, because
mm,
washed me. And all the motivation and all the all what you need to heal, you need to feel supported, you need to feel like you're related, you need to feel equipped with the skills you need to, because healing requires some motivation, and it requires a good emotional mental health status. And he did all of the opposite things, and I'm sure he was a wonderful surgeon, but but that only means so much when we are here to be healers. And so the reason I'm here is really to relate to people, to give them power, not to show how smart I am and how I can manage a vet. I mean, in the last days of your life, we're not really going to care what our blood pressure was.
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we are not defined by our numbers and by our diagnosis codes. And if we treat patients like they are defined as such, then we are missing a wonderful opportunity to give them power and to find healing in their own body. And every person has the right to do that. And that's why I'm here. And I had to release all that stuff and say, my gift and my skill set is different. And I'm really a teacher more than a doctor. And the fact that I had to release that to become what I am, which is really, I'd say, a teacher, is I had to find humility in that, and I
Mm.
had to be okay with it. And I had to find a lot of humor, because I've done some really funny stuff that I wasn't trained in medical school to do, that is funny. And you have to like say, this is really fun. This life is fun if you are your true self.
Oh, I love that. So I have so many questions to ask you. But the first question that I want to talk to you about is, I love how you said I had to release that.
Yeah.
I feel that we put ourselves into these damn cages because of the conversations we have with ourselves. So for me, I look back, Susanna, on my 15-year corporate career. I don't even know who that person was. I
Yeah.
was so needed to get that job done, and I would cut people off at the throat if they weren't doing it. I was so methodical and just so addicted to the climb that I
Yes.
became someone I didn't even know I was. And I think we all go through that. Who is this person
Yeah.
anymore? And so for our listener that thinks to themselves, God, I love how you were able to release that. I love how you were able to step into your power. What is one thing or one micro step or one question that our listeners could begin to ask themselves, Suzannah, to take you back where you were in that journey
Yeah.
to begin to release these cages that they've placed in themselves and come into who they're meant to be?
Yeah, yeah, I love that question. I think that's there's so much there. And one thing that I think is so important that I've recently been recognizing in my patients and in my work is your identity
Mm,
and what you claim as your identity versus what people give you and you accept as your identity. And I think that we need to take a minute. I think every person needs to take a minute to really ask themselves, you know, I am perceiving, if you know James Clear and Atomic Habits, that book, which is so cool. But he talks about if your identity, for example, if you're trying to quit smoking and someone offers you a cigarette, and then you say, no, I'm trying to quit, then your identity is a smoker, right? And then you're climbing against an identity, and that's not authentic to your true self, right?
mm,
But if someone offers you a cigarette and you say, I don't smoke, this is a whole new conversation, and they have a whole new thought process about you, because as opposed to I'm trying to quit, oh, I'll just ask after he's had a few drinks, like then it's a different relationship. Oh, I don't smoke, okay, well, I'm going to stop barking up that tree, they're not going to smoke with me, where do I go?
yeah.
So what we have to kind of see that, and I see a lot of times, and particularly just in the world that I'm in, which is health, that people will come in with an identity of a sick, broken person. And we have cultivated that because as a physician, I can't see any person in the healthcare setting without giving you an identity, which is a diagnosis code. And those diagnosis codes are never, your most vital self searching for purpose, because that wouldn't get anything covered. They have to be broken. They have to be sick. The sicker they are, the more coverage you'll get, the more labs you can order, the more tests you can do. And so because of that, then you walk away saying, oh, I'm diabetic. If
Mm,
I'm interacting with my universe as a diabetic or as a depressive or as a degenerative disc disease, some of these terms are these, we had to put a label on you. But if you claim that as your identity, then how does that interact with you being your most vibrant self and interacting with the next time you're at a gathering, a family gathering? Are you going to be truly present, or you're going to be like, I can't eat that because I'm a diabetic? I can't do that because, I can't plan, can I really take that trip I always wanted to take because now I'm broken? And so that identity question, I think, is, what is the identity from which you're operating? And is it truly the one you hope to claim? And if it's not, then we need to do some curious kind exploration to say, no, my identity is not a doctor or a whole food plant-based eater. I see that on the other end of the spectrum. I see very clean eaters, but then that have reversed perhaps their diabetes or their chronic disease, but then they get in a box where I am a salt, oil, sugar-free, whole food plant-based eater. So I'm getting isolated and caged in by that identity, even though that identity once gave me purpose and power. It's a process. It's not your identity. So your identity is, something that you want to continuously claim and know that it's serving you towards your best end, and it's the person you're striving to become. And this is it's a journey for all of us, right? It's not like any one of us has mastered that piece. I think it's a conversation that needs to be, regularly revisited.
I love that. I love that. And as you were talking about the plant based eating, it just made me think, especially as a female being raised in this world, these air quote diets that get thrown at us that become like a cage. So I look back, Susanna, and oh my God, did the stupidest shit to think I'm going to lose the weight. And these cleanses, not eating, starving, all of these stupid ass things. And it just makes me think about these cages that we place ourselves in with what we think is appropriate to feed our bodies. And I would love to hear from you, my friend, in this beautiful lifestyle medicine role that you are in. How do we, in these chaotic, busy consumerism world, how do we silence some of that? And how do we really begin to listen to our bodies?
Yeah. Yeah, it's huge. It's so huge because we're being fed so much different information, and we know that the information we're being fed is trying to get us hooked, and it's trying to be disagreeing, if you know what I mean, because that's where the clicks come from. But when you look at, nutritional science, 90% is in agreement, right? And if we can focus on what we can do and what we know to be true, which is make it whole, make it real. Is it food?
Mhm.
And in terms of nourishing ourselves, and then ask, is it nourishing me? And getting more mindfulness. I talk a lot about not just what you eat, but when you eat, why you eat, how you eat. And
Mm.
and and the process should be one that is truly nourishing. And you ask yourself, am I doing this because I'm stressed, or am I hungry? So that's a good question, and not with criticism, because if you find, oh, I'm stress eating, there's power there, not,
Mm.
oh, I'm a stress eater, because then that's your identity, and then you're, weak and broken, but looking at that with this kind curiosity and distance and a sense of humor, not criticism, is really, wherever you are with your food journey, because it is so touchy, and there's so many emotions that, oh, I used to eat that with my dad at the baseball game, or I used to that. And so, but they're not the same thing. The food is not the same as the emotion, but we have to get distance from it to find power and curiosity in the journey. And it's who's it, Judd Brewer, who I love, he's an addiction psychiatrist, and he talks a lot about retraining your reward centers.
Mm.
So I've been taught ever since I was 3 that my reward is cake, or whatever it is. For me, I tend towards more salty things than sweet things. But you know yourself, and figure out what it is that you've been taught as a reward, and this is where you tend to say, "Oh, to hell with that! I'm just going to eat this."
Yes.
And so notice what that is and that behavior is, and then get distance from it, and notice, okay, first of all, what's the trigger to make you eat that thing or overeat that thing, which is commonly the case when we're talking about an addictive type food that we're doing out of habit or out of stress. And so then you kind of look at it, and you're kind of like, okay, so what's the trigger? I'm stressed. I just had an argument or whatever. And then I eat it, and then truly ask yourself without criticism, what is the true result? Because in the first few bites, you're like, oh, I love this, because you get that dopamine hit, and you're,
Yes.
oh, yeah. But then, even sometimes within 30 minutes, but certainly by 3 hours, if you're being kindly curious about that journey, you're going to find probably it's not actually a reward, right? So it's maybe a punishment, right? So if I eat all the donuts, then what do? And my face feels greasy. I feel bloated. I feel gassy. I
Yes.
feel guilty. I have all this conversation in my head. So all of those things, are they serving to create and support me towards being nourished towards my finest self? And if you can clearly look at that, not with criticism, but with curiosity, and say, they're not, that is then a punishment, not a reward. And what he's done is he's looked at this randomized controlled trials and said that if somebody goes intentionally about, say, emotional eating, then I believe it's by the 10th time, and forgive me because it's been a while since I looked at this information, but that he reduced emotional eating by 40% just by doing it mindfully and non-critically. Because we as women are always doing it critically, right? It's always this like, oh God, that's my sweet tooth. That's my weakness. Just even the way we talk about certain food choices is putting blame on us and criticism on us. But we want to look at that from power and curiosity. And it's from that you can begin to move. You have to be okay with what is, to then move to your next step on your journey. And that step is not going to be the same as whoever's next to you. And so it's this really fun exploration if we can just get a little space and silence the noise and truly say, bringing back to your point, for me, is this a reward? And if you find, yeah, it is, well, do it. Right. But if you truly are looking at that with curiosity and find that it is not serving you to your best self, then you've got some fun work ahead. Maybe not so fun.
Yeah, yeah, girl. Yeah, girl.
But right.
I just started reading Viola Davis's book, Finding Me.
Ah,
Oh, it's so good. And
yeah.
she talks it just made me think we are so much more alike than we are different. Aren't we? All of us collectively. And she was just talking about how in her 50s, sitting with her therapist, talking about these childhood stories that she had that she ran from her whole life, and how she said, you know, I'd rather go in the ring with Mike Tyson than deal with this shit that I've been telling myself. And I thought, God, isn't that true? And as you're talking about the foods and the choices, it made me think back to Oreos is my MO, girl. Like I can go knee deep, and it brings back memories from my childhood, you know, comfort food what I went to. And I want to ask you what I find that I think so many of us struggle with that you talked about is then the guilt and the shame that we put on ourselves. So I go knee deep in an Oreo, I'm a sleeve in, and then afterwards I feel like shit. I'm mad at myself. I've done this again.
Yeah.
So what I heard you say is be aware of it
Mhm.
and give yourself grace. And on like the 10th time, you'll begin to rewire that conversation. Is that the best approach to sort of move us through this shame and this bullshit that we tell ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think that's part of it. And I think it can be different for different people, because we each do things perhaps for different reasons. So getting that mindfulness and distance from whatever it is really key as you explore what your needs are around that. Because sometimes the trigger for you might be different than the trigger for somebody else. So,
Mm,
so it's really that cycle. It's that whole what's the trigger, what's the behavior, what's the end result, and then looking at the end result. But sometimes we got to look back at the trigger and say, well, is that trigger something that I can begin to retrain a different habit that actually addresses that? Or is it a trigger that I can remove if I notice it? Because sometimes we actually have power to remove a trigger and sometimes we don't. Like we can't change who our parents are or who are, or who our colleague at work is or whatever that the trigger might be. But we can certainly change the way we look at the trigger. And so there's it's the whole thing is really just about observation. And I think that it's so many of us are struggling now with this, perhaps more than ever, because of our constant state of distraction.
yes.
You've got your emails dinging, you've got your text dinging, you've got 47 things on your to-do list, you've got all of this stuff, so that we don't really have, unless we consciously block it out, it's so hard to find that time to just observe.
Mm,
And then you think you're wasting time because you got all this stuff to do if you're
yes.
observing. So this search, I don't know if you're reading or if you've read Stolen Focus by Johan Hari, which is talking about just that. It's just about the tech driven, and you see it with your kids, but we see it in ourselves. Because we can't escape it, and we're so overloaded with information, how we really consciously have to put walls around to connect to ourselves and to truly connect with others without the phone on the table, without all of this input. And so just to be curious in the journey and look at those things, your trigger, the behavior, and the result, and look at it with distance. And so a lot of times I'll talk about, if you have a stressor, which all of us have, probably a fair share of stressor,
Yeah.
if they're weighing on your head, it's always ugly and you can't see anything around it, and you can't see the potential benefit or the power you could get from it. But if you take it over here, you might just find that I always say, it's kind of nice from the left. It's just that if we begin to see, our perception creates our reality. And if we look at these things differently, and rather than looking with criticism, we look with opportunity, that
Mm,
every obstacle we sense weighing us down is actually opportunity. I see patients all the time who just had a heart attack or a cancer diagnosis, and that is often what brings them in to begin the journey to their best life. Right? It's opportunity to truly recognize, wow, there's meaning in life. I can now recognize, because I had this horrible thing that nobody wants, but because I had that, it's forced me to see what is truly important, who is truly important, what I should be doing in my life. And that's been the best thing perhaps that ever happened to a lot of people, if they see it as power. And that can
Mm.
apply to whatever your struggle or stressor is. And so that's a big journey, and it's hard to find it when we're in a constant state of distraction.
I love that. I love that. And as you were talking about just all of the things that we all have going on personally, professionally, the juggle game, thinking that you can do it all and the weight of it all and hand raised. I've felt that a lot lately, a lot of heaviness, a lot of feeling like I got to get it all done, a lot of going to the point of exhaustion. Then it becomes this status symbol. And to your point, the triggers. And then I know, for me personally, as you were just talking about the triggers, the one thing I haven't stopped and realized because you're so busy going through the things is that when I start to feel out of control, that is when my old habits come back and I go to the Oreos or I go to the booze or I go to something to numb and take the edge off. But how I just love how you worded that and how beautiful that is to be just even aware of that. Which leads me to my question for you, my friend. You had talked beautifully about creating this just intentional space to become aware. And for the listener that thinks to themselves, that's great, I got no time. What
Yes.
would you tell them? How do they create what is that? What's a micro moment? One thing that we can create to hear ourselves, to see that space,
Yeah.
see how we're reacting. Any recommendations? Anything you do?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I do, but I think again, it has to be personalized. And if it adds stress to you, then it's probably not for you. And I always say this with my patients that if anything I suggest is adding to you a sense of another to do, then just be aware that that might not be the thing for you to do right now, right? Because we want to really focus on, that human being, not the human doing, and so many of us are constantly doing. And so, I love bookends on the day. And I'll tell you what I mean by that, but with a caveat that for a lot of, say, working moms, a morning routine, which is so often talked about in so many
Yeah.
books, whatever, is just okay, hanging up. I am not listening to that because I got, kids to feed. I got this, I got this, I got this, I get this. So that might not be, this format might not be appropriate for you, but what is appropriate for you is just find any space. And so I look at often what are the grounded things that we have with regularity. So if you are pretty good at eating at 2 or 3 meals a day or whatever it is, then that's opportunity. So when you sit down to eat, then you take a deep breath in and you let it out. Maybe you do that 3 times with your exhales longer than your inhale, and you give some gratitude. This does not have to be a religious practice. It might be
Mm.
for some, it doesn't have to be, but just consider the farmer that grew it, the place it came from, anything. It doesn't have to be deep, but those are opportunities. And what it does in those moments is get you into this space, not like I'm going to cram this down while I'm checking my email. I'm doing all
Yes.
like so many of us do, but just take that time and think of the ramifications or the great potential benefits. If you do that, then, we have this nervous system, this stress system that is often in so many of us imbalanced. And we have our sympathetic nervous system that's like, fight and fight and fight and fight. And our rest and digest is like, come on, help me here. We're getting acid reflux, we're not sleeping. And that's that boosting your parasympathetic nervous system and telling yourself, I am safe, or I am at peace, or whatever you need at that time. It can literally take 90 seconds to do a deep breathing to give yourself a boost and support that parasympathetic nervous system. And then you're kind of helping foster receiving the nutrients that you're eating. Because, and I see so many people that are so stressed, they're eating these pristine meals and they're like, it's just not working, because we're stressing so much over it. Our body really is in this state of war. And if you're in a state of perceiving war, then how are we going to really digest and take those nutrients in and allow them to do what they're in our body to do? So mealtime is fantastic and potentially and again, some people might say that's really stressful because I had an eating disorder. So, you look at what are the times where you think you could plug in 3 minutes? And I personally like bookends on the day where I say no screens. And I fall into this really bad, just like that, picking up the phone first thing in the morning is that is like, I can feel when I do that first thing in the morning, my whole day starts on someone else's territory. And so, this is an opportunity to really just say, okay, I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to move. I might listen to something that's inspirational. I might read. I might, hopefully get out in nature and get grounding. But try to shut the screens off, that artificial light, which, and get outside in bright light helps really support your circadian rhythm. And it could be 5 minutes. It could be 20 minutes. But if you can find that, and sometimes I gotta, get the kids oatmeal on the table first. I gotta, you gotta do some stuff first, but just try. And so for me on those days, which is most days, where I'll go on my walk after I've gotten the kids food, then I just try to resist that temptation to go ahead and check an email, to get, to look at or reply to text or anything. That is like sacred time where I am not on someone else's ask list. And so just creating those walls to help nudge you towards healthier mindset, healthier behaviors, and make it natural in your schedule. Tag it onto things you already do as much as you can to succeed and make it an ingrained habit. That was a really long answer.
No, girl, you're taking me to church. I'm like, oh, you should. For those of you who might not be watching us on video on the YouTube video channel, I am smiling like the Cheshire Cat. I'm like, preach, girl. I will tell you, getting that phone away from my nightstand table, Suzannah, was one of the best gifts that I ever did. My husband got me a $20 phone charger from Amazon. It had like a little shelf so it couldn't get wet. Although I guess phones can get wet now, who knows? And I put the phone in the bed or in the bathroom before I go to bed.
Yeah.
It is time for me to read a book. I write my 3 wins of the day. I actually talk to my husband. We
Yes.
laugh. We play the high-low game. I have slept so much better. I
Yeah.
never realized how much that phone was just jacking me up and making me feel like shit
Yeah.
before I went to bed. And I loved how you said, I can feel it.
Yes.
You can feel it. You can feel it. I want to talk about, so we had, for our listeners, Suzannah and I had this on the call, had this time together months ago, and I kept getting sick. And I thought to myself, this is a lesson. And I want to talk about it here, the power of our mind body connection. And you had talked about it when the mind is at war constantly, what it does to your body. And I think we always think it's woo woo.
Yeah.
But it's not. And what I realized, Suzannah, is that I kept getting sick month after month after month, 3 months in a row. And I realized that my body was telling me to rest for a long time, but I was not listening to it. There's all these little signs. So unpack for us in your beautiful lifestyle medicine hat, the mind body connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please.
It's just so powerful, so powerful. And I think that doctors probably potentially more than many ignore this and deny it, because they themselves are, really high on the burnout. They themselves are going and ignoring all of their physical signs. And so there's so much power here. And if we just think of that connection, and you think of, say, the stress response, which I think is the best way to connect that. And you think, okay, in the short term, we have the stress response that's life preserving and life saving. And that stress is actually great. If you've seen that performance graph, a little bit of stress can help you optimize your performance and help you get to the finest version of yourself, as opposed to just hanging out on the couch, eating Cheetos and binge watching Netflix because you have no deadlines, right? And so we've all been there. And that's not the journey to our finest self. But if we recognize a little bit of stress is good and an acute amount of stress is life-saving. And so I perceive a lion, I'm going to fight or flight it, right? And so what happens in my body is all these things that get oxygen to where they need to go. I've got to have oxygen to my brain so I can think quick. I've got to have oxygen to my muscles so that I can run quick. And in that journey, we raise our blood pressure, we raise our heart rate, we raise how fast we breathe, but we also, to speak to getting sick all the time, we divert our healing mechanisms and our immune system to deal with an acute bite of a lion, right? To deal with an acute injury. I have more, potential to clot if bitten. But over a long amount of time, that increases the likelihood of getting a clot or of having other, of diverting my energy towards healing and regeneration and all the things to prune and to fight infection. Say a virus or those things. I need to just deal with this acute scenario. And if we're pushing that and pushing it and pushing it, then our immune system suffers. And we see that consistently. And we see, that if we're stressed, we often are not sleeping well. We know that if we're not sleeping well, that we will not mount an immune response to a vaccine. They've looked at this, and we don't ask this, right? We don't ask you, we ask you, have you had a fever in the last 24 hours before you receive a vaccine? But we don't ask you, did you sleep well? Because if you didn't sleep well, you probably should postpone the vaccine because your body is not going to make as good a response. And that's been shown with multiple different vaccines in multiple trials. And we still don't employ that in our questions because we're so busy. Well, I got to get the vaccine so I get to the next patient, and we're not really thinking of how to support a body to work to its optimum. And that requires balance and that requires sleep. That's a third of our life should be spent sleeping. And how many of us are doing that? How many of us are getting 8 hours of sleep or more than 7 hours of sleep? The vast majority of adults need 7 to 9 hours. And so often we're paying bills, we're watching blue light, which is the strongest impeder of melatonin, which is really necessary to allow that sleep to take off so that we can lower our cortisol and lower our blood pressure. All these things are so key to find balance. And our whole life is telling us that we're supposed to be going. And so taking that conscious time to say, no, this is what I need. And those little spaces of being and not doing are so pivotal for creativity, for allowing a journey towards our finest self, and for even taking the time to realize who is the self I'm trying to be, and what do I need to do to get there? And if we don't do that, we are sacrificing our greatest potential.
Yeah. I loved how you talked about a good night's sleep and the power in it. A friend had told me the other day, said, Meg, the majority of your life problems can be solved by one of three things. 1, a good night's sleep. 2, a walk outside. Or 3, a call with a good friend.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Right
ain't that the truth? And to your point, so many of us struggle with sleep because we can't sleep or our sleep's jacked up. For the listener that is having trouble sleeping and they cannot rest, they do not know how to rest. I struggle with this too. I always feel like we talk about rest like it's just, remember that easy button from Staples, the easy button, like you can just hit it.
Yeah.
No, you can't go from 100 to 0 like that. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
What is your recommendation? What are some micro steps that we can do so we can rest? What does that look like? What are some small intentional moments that we can rest, or that we can do some practices before we go to bed so we can sleep?
Yeah. It's really, really big. And I think it's one of the hardest things. I struggle with it myself so often. And because it's, especially for go-getters and doers, the more you try, the worse it gets. And then it's this like feeling of, it's so frustrating. And the more frustrating it is, it just gets this relationship with stress. So again, it's like getting distance from it and looking at your relationship with it, taking some basic steps to recognize what my body needs to know in order to allow myself to wind down is that I am safe. I am okay, and I can, and there are things that I can do in my life. And I like to start with those basic reachable things, as opposed to, starting right with the relationship with sleep, because for so many people, it's just been a lifelong struggle. And the more that we lay there, the more frustrated we get. And so the basic things, using light to work for you is so huge. Recognizing, at dinner time, shut your lights in half and
Mm.
mimic sunlight. When in doubt, what is nature telling you to do? It's telling you to go outside in the daytime and get that bright light in the morning, just that 5 minutes of bright light, or 20 minutes if it's a gray day, first thing in the morning. Just tell yourself, and get your kids out there with you if it's at all feasible or possible, because it will help them regulate their sleep as well. And so managing that circadian rhythm, because the one thing our brain always knew was, is it day or is it night?
Mm.
And it doesn't know that anymore, because we're constantly looking at a screen all day and night, and we're not moving outside, or so many of us aren't, because it's just not part of, we're not working the fields anymore. So we have to incorporate that in and recognize just how valuable that is. And it doesn't have to be moving. It can be, that would be wonderful, but it doesn't have to be. It can literally just being. It could be holding your coffee cup, but doing it in bright light, in natural light, first thing in the morning, and then shutting down the lights to mimic sunset as effectively as you can. Don't leave all the bright lights on, because I got to scrub those dishes really well. Just shut them down. The dishes are dirtier. It's fine. It's supporting your immune system. But really, it's cutting those lights into orange red light spectrum, which is calming on your nervous system, as opposed to blue and white light, and get after those nighttime screens. And that's kind of step one, and scheduling in enough sleep for you and having grace about that. Because if you're at 5 hours right now, then you're probably not going to go to 7 hours. You're going to go to maybe 5.5, maybe 5 and 15. And then, you try to edge towards that in 15 to 30-minute increments, being kind to yourself, and schedule in the time that allows you to sleep. And that's time in bed, not necessarily in sleep. And it often takes 20 minutes to fall asleep. And this is magnified if you have a partner that's like, immediately out, and then you're like, oh, can't stand
Yes. I
it.
love I love how you said that. Give yourself some grace.
Yeah.
I had a friend tell me, because I'm so type A, that I would always set my alarm for the same time every morning, because it's when I gotta get up. So, and it's when I got my routine. She had said to me, Meg, I stopped doing that shit a long time ago. She said, I give myself 7 to 8 hours sleep. So
Yeah.
whenever I go to bed, I wake up and I set the alarm 7 to 8 hours after that. And I thought to
Mhm.
myself, it felt like such a permission slip, these cages that we put ourselves in that we
Yeah.
don't even realize.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And to also know that many of us put ourselves in this cage, this identity of, I am a night owl, or I am, what am I? But know that that changes, that can change. And so as we age, our melatonin surges earlier. Well, our teenagers, as they become teenagers, their melatonin surges later. This is where we get this great opportunity to be individuals.
Mm.
When our teens are supposed to be up and finding themselves, and developing their brain at really a different time clock. And I thought that was just amazing. And to have that freedom to think, God, I've always stayed up so late. And it's such a tendency for people that are parents as well, because the kids are finally in bed.
Yeah.
You can finally do all your crap. And, it's so just to recognize, though, you will do it better. You will feel better about it. You will enjoy it more. And you will also look better. I mean, just even that, if you get a good night's sleep, versus if you don't. If you don't get a good night's sleep, you perceive facial what's the word, expressions differently. And I, isn't that
Interesting.
crazy? And so you could look over at your colleague and be like, "Oh my gosh, she's giving me the stink eye. She must have been pissed about what I said." When she just had gas. It was just like absolutely, you will misread facial structures. And when we look at how much of our quality of life, how much of our work satisfaction depends on personal and interpersonal interactions, And to think that if I don't sleep well, not only am I going to be more irritable, more agitated, more anxious, 30% more anxious after one night of insufficient sleep, according to one study that came out of Stanford. It's, so I am more likely to not feel good in myself, but I'm also more likely to misinterpret other people's attempts at communicating with me. And
Mm.
so because that plays such a major role on our emotional state, which plays such a major role on our physical state, on our performance, on our productivity, all of it just mounds up. So the value of sleep is just amazing. And we've all felt that when you're like crying and so upset about something, and then you get a good night's sleep, and the next day you're like, I can't really remember what I was upset about. But I think I might have been overreacting.
Oh God, girl. Those
We've all
email
been there.
flurries and you're like, oh shit, I just started up a shitstorm for really nothing. I guess it wasn't that big of a deal.
Yes. Like,
uh, I love that. Oh, and I've had plenty of those, plenty
oh,
of
me
those.
too. Me too. Yeah.
Especially when I was heavy in my drinking days. You ever do that where where you look for you see your phone and it's right beside you and like, oh shit, I
Yes,
made some mistakes last night. I made some
exactly. And then that is such a big deal because, drinking, unfortunately, because, I lived in Sonoma for 6 years, everything, all my patients' lives and work, everything, all the baby showers had like this full bars and wonderful, oh, you want a Pinot, everything was devoted around wine. And it's, thank God I was pregnant 3 times in that stint, or else I would have been a full-fledged alcoholic. But it's so amazing. And especially, now more than ever, it's looking at that. While I love a good glass of wine with dinner, it tastes delicious, it's wonderful. I feel like it's part of my Italian roots. It does not serve me. And
mm,
and it's a real curiosity. Is this a reward, or is this a punishment? And it doesn't
mm,
mean I never do it, but I gotta say, I do it so much less than I ever have before, because it impedes your quality of sleep. It makes it so that you drink more caffeine the next day because your sleep is not good. Then you're impeding that sleep cycle. So that wine or alcohol of choice, whatever it is, the alcohol, the caffeine, the sleep, these are hand in hand. And so many of us, we want that wind down, but it so impairs the quality of your sleep. And I think women, particularly 40 and up, really have to just come to grips with the negative effect it has on our microbiome, on
mm.
weight, on our hormone balance, on all of these things. And not to criticize if we have some wine every now and again, or whatever you drink, but to truly ask yourself, is this serving me? And the great thing to make this easier now is there's a lot more options for bitters or for non-alcoholic drinks that you can put in a fancy glass, that you can, people are starting to come around to that recognition that this, sadly, I'm not coming from any point of criticism, but it's a brain toxin. If we are on the journey to our best self, then is this something that's serving us? And that conversation, if we are really struggling with alcoholism, which is not a weakness, it's a true problem that requires multiple levels of help. That conversation is not going to fix all of that, but just bringing awareness and kindness and grace and curiosity to the habits that perhaps have become normal. I mean, how many people have made this a habit just to handle child rearing?
Yeah. Get
you
through
know,
the day to get
yeah,
through the day.
yeah, it's what we do when we cook or whatever it is, but just really looking at that, there's so much power, and the effect it has on sleep and then on your productivity, on your energy, and so on is so huge. So there's just so much opportunity there if we look at it as a journey, in an opportunity way, not in an obstacle or critical way.
I have to tell you, you are such a gift to all of us that are trying to have better health. When we had spoke months ago, we were connected through a beautiful friend, Jason Youngblood. Shout out, Jason. Good humans knowing good humans. And I said, after we got off the call, I thought to myself, I needed a physician like you for so long. We're so quick and raised in our culture to trust our physicians and never question it. And I feel that we are so quick to write the script, pop the pill, because to your point, it's all about the system. And I thank you so much for the curiosity that you've had to lean into your calling, to give us the permission slip and to ask these powerful questions, to put the health in our hands. And
Yeah.
Suzannah, our listeners that want to find more of you, that want to follow you, that want more of your content and to hear your words, where can we do that, my friend?
Yes, yes. So I see patients individually. Truly, my favorite thing to do is create groups to help nudge people and create communities that make healthy living something achievable, something you can unite around rather than
Mm,
feel isolated by, and to create communities around healthy living. So that's my where I just feel like that's where the need is. And so my favorite thing to do is employee health and wellness, because you have the opportunity. You're already a community, and if we can nudge that community to make the healthy option easier, then that's just money in the bank. Because then the less that you have to think about and consciously go against the flow to choose healthy, then the more of a struggle it is and the less we succeed. So creating communities around health is my favorite thing to do. And so I do that through employee health wellness webinars, which I love. And my website for that has all that stuff on it is mytruehealthjourney.com. But I also see individual patients through two ways, and I see them here locally through that practice in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but I see them in patients in 7 states through Love Life. So that's love.life telehealth. And it's just such a cool, because whatever state you're in, all of the providers on this platform are lifestyle medicine based. They are the most amazing. I'm so honored to be part of this group of physicians that, and we are covering all 50 states. So I have 7 of them, but all of the physicians in there are just amazing. And this is what we do to really give power and the skills and the tools and the evidence-based ability to use your lifestyle to help support health rather than disease. And then I have a YouTube channel at Dr. Suzb, SUZB,
that's
DRSUZB.
awesome. And guys, I'm going to link all of that in the
Oh, I
show
think
notes.
that you are frozen.
I'm going to link all of that in the show notes, my friend. And so that way you can just click right in it. Thank you so much, Suzannah, for being here, pulling up a seat at
Oh,
the
you're
table.
back. Are you back?
All right, guys. Thank you so much.